Hi, everybody. I am Gabrielle Oliveira, and I am assistant professor here at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development. I'm really excited to be here with you all today for this module's discussion on language policy and rights. And I'm excited that we'll get to talk about a little bit more in depth on the article that you read from TESOL Quarterly called Eu Sei, I Know, which discusses equity for immigrant children and immigrant students in a 2A immersion program. And I hope that with this article, along with chapters 17 and 18 from the textbook that you're reading, and maybe you'd be interested in jumping into the suggested reading by Ariana Mangual Figueroa, who talks a little bit more on the situation also for undocumented students and how this idea of rights and citizenship matter, right, in bilingual education. But for today, I'm excited to get into a little bit, of the background of the article and give you a sense of what the research, how the research has taken place. And for educators, why does it matter, right? Like, why does it matter to have a framework like that? Why does it matter to think about that as we plan, design, and teach within bilingual education programs in the United States? And so I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So I'm going to share the screen and I'll start the slides here with you all. So really what I wanted, right, some of the questions that I wanted to get into today have to do with this idea of how do issues of language policy and rights, how do they overlap? And how can the framework of language policy and rights help educators better prepare for instruction and planning? Because you may be a teacher, but you may be an administrator, you may be, a parent, you may be preparing to become a teacher or an administrator in education. So those are some of the things that I think could be really useful to have in mind as you move forward with, this class and thinking about bilingual education in your place of work. So the agenda, as I said, is to focus on language policy and rights as a framework, to think about the article that you read as a case study for discussion, and what does that mean for thinking ahead and reflection. And what I hope to do is to also think about what does this all mean in the time of a pandemic, right? To be responsive to the moment that we're living in, it also means that we have to think about research in context. So this is something that I'm very passionate about. And then I would welcome also you all to, send me an email so we can keep this discussion going. So the framework that you're reading, right, for this module and watching videos and engaging with has to do with language policy and rights, right? So this idea that, if you were able to take a look at chapter 17 and chapter 18 from the textbook, you'll see that we can think about, right, there's this idea of thinking about education as a problem, a right, and a resource, right, in one piece. And then there's also the other chapter that I find it really interesting to think about the meanings of identity, pluralism, the assimilationist tradition of thinking about how to learn and why to learn English and when, right? So I think all of these pieces are really interesting for us to think about. I also think they overlap, right? They're not living on their own. So this is where I think that you can help me connect the dots and we can connect the dots together and try to think about when do these pieces and the definitions of these pieces, when do they overlap and when does it become a moment that, educators and teachers and communities can act on it and be a fruitful type of program implementation for all. So the case study that I'm calling a case study, but this is really an ethnography that has been taking place for the last 3 years now. We're entering our third year. And I want you all to think with me in this, the research questions, the design, and the selected findings that I'm showing you all today, to think about what does it matter for administrators, right? So planning a dual language bilingual education program in schools. How does that happen and why would these frameworks contribute to our thinking? For teachers, why does it matter to know some of this background when you're teaching students in your classroom, if it's an ELL or an ESL class or immigrant students or 1.5 or second generation. In this case, I'm talking about Brazilian immigrants for this case study, but you can think about all other groups as well. But also for your non-Portuguese speakers or your non-Spanish speakers or non-Creole speakers in the classroom, right? Also, what does that mean to understand this microcosm? For families, I also think it's fundamental to think about a lot of the reasons, right? Sometimes students, parents are not involved and they're not coming to school and doing a lot of that. It's because there is a cultural shift, right? Once you immigrate to the United States and you're trying to figure out, navigate the school system, navigate the educational system in the United States, which for many is not really a familiar or your intuition may fail you when you think about what does fundraising mean and the things you have to do for the school. And then finally, for students, how can this benefit and students that are learning inside and outside of the classroom, right? How do we bridge this famous gap of home and school, which in my view, they're much closer together than, apart. So the local context, right? So the program is in the state of Massachusetts, and then you all know, which emerged from this 15-year period of English-only legislation. But this program is in a school that has had transitional bilingual education for a very long time, and they are in a heavy, immigrant community. So for them, even though they weren't working under those legislations, they were still very much serving their community no matter what. But they were able to have a two-way immersion program start in 2018, right? So that for them was a huge milestone, a huge change. So we call the site, right, Lake Elementary School, and we're looking at, the cohorts that we're looking at were the first cohorts that started in the two-way immersion program, which was kindergarten and first grade. A total, so it's 74 in kindergarten, 84 in first grade. So we're looking at this group of students in the course of several years, right, to see what's happening to them, to their families, to the teachers, to everybody. And the goal of the program, right, the district was very clear that there was a social justice, equity, and language rights, right? So again, here, I think it's really important to think about why would the district or teachers or the community frame having a dual language program that is heavily, centered on this idea of social justice, equity, and language rights. So this is something that was part of their rationale. The framework that we use for this particular paper that you read is to think about language status, right? So ultimately, what we argue in this paper is that while children are elevating the status of the language inside the classrooms, they themselves, as human beings with rights, they're not themselves being elevated in the classroom. So they serve as, the model for Portuguese speaking, but in many ways, sometimes, instructors may be more focused on the non-Portuguese speakers because they know that, they need to perhaps learn more words or something that is different. And then sometimes the immigrant children, the newcomers, are not the ones getting all of, a lot of the attention inside the classroom. So as I said, right, we've been designing this as a 3-year ethnographic research project, and we do classroom observations and interviews, and we're there, once, twice, 3 times a week. So this has been a lot of different points of data that we've collected for this one. And for this piece, right, there were Portuguese-speaking teachers, and there's also English-speaking teachers, and then the children in these different classrooms. So the first finding that I wanted to hone in here is this idea of equity in English class. And equity is really tied to the frameworks that you're reading for this week, right? This idea of, so in the name of equity, so that children have their rights respected and their identity informs their rights, right? As Portuguese speakers, there's this idea of having a two-way immersion program. However, what we saw was that during English class, which that's what they called, right, or the English block, the Brazilian children, right, that spoke mostly Portuguese, they would be silent for most of the time because they struggled with the scaffolding that was being offered in the classroom, that it wasn't always clear. And then sometimes, you know, they asked for peers for help, but it was much harder for them to participate and to be valued and to be seen, right, within this space that they were. And then in the Portuguese moment of it, they also weren't very active participating because the content in many ways felt much more basic for them. So thus the title of the article, which is Eu sei, I know, and Eu sei means I know. And one of the students said that in both languages, right? She's like under her breath kind of saying, I already know this, and this is not really pushing or valuing what I have, which is not to say that it doesn't happen in other classrooms that are not about dual language, right? Where you're always going to have the students who are uh, moving forward a little quicker than others. That's part of having a diverse classroom anyway. But the idea here that the Portuguese speakers whose program was really based on to kind of think about their rights as existing, they weren't really participating much in either the Portuguese nor the English moment. So the equity part, right, gave us pause because we were thinking, what does it mean to have equity? What does it mean to respect and engage children's rights? What does it mean to see and value every child, right, in the classroom within a dual language program like this one? And in addition to that, what we saw, and we actually discussed this a bunch with teachers and they agreed, and then in year two, it really changed, that a lot of the disciplining, the teachers, even though they were supposed to be, talking mostly in English, they would switch, or I'm sorry, they were supposed to be talking Portuguese, they would switch to English at times that they had to discipline kids, right? So they would be speaking in Portuguese, but then if they had to say something about going to the bathroom and sitting still and crisscross applesauce and 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me, and all of these commands, they were talked about in English. So we also thought about what does that mean for the classroom to understand, are they getting that, are they internalizing that perhaps English is this hegemonic language that is what decides, what's right and what's wrong. So that was also a part of our discussion as well, to think about the role of that. So why does this matter, right? To think about English and Portuguese in this particular setting, and to think about the status, right? This idea of language status, which I think is very much related to this idea that, reading about identity and reading about the problem, the resource, right? In terms of being bilingual, what does that mean? That in many ways, children, immigrant children or children of Brazilian immigrants, they were the ones kind of modeling and elevating that language that was in the classroom and being said, look, there's a Portuguese, group speaking, and other students can learn as much, but at the same time, they themselves, the children themselves, weren't being seen as valued as much as their language. So this is a really important distinction here, which is the child, right, as one of deserving of rights and human rights and all of the rights that a child should have and a human being should have, and then the language that that child was bringing to the classroom and how that language was being used. So it was really, and we've been doing really great work with the teachers who are so open and they're very dedicated and they want to do really well for their students. They're Brazilian themselves. So in many ways is trying to understand how these frameworks can help us reflect on these classroom practices and then quickly adjust them. So then we're not propagating, right? Either from a programmatic point of view and saying if we have a 2A immersion or if we have a dual language program, that's it. We're doing the equity part and everything else is going to go well, right? It's not the end of the line. And at the same time for teachers in the classroom to try to think about, okay, what am I actually doing in terms of language, but also the child, right? So to try to understand that within the context. So to kind of go back, right, to the framework that we started with, it's interesting to think about the language part. So that would be Portuguese or being bilingual, speaking English and Portuguese, the policy in this case, which is in Massachusetts kind of emerging from this 15-year ban, but also the districts choosing to go on and do a two-way immersion program, but also kind of based on this agenda of equity and social justice and rights, right? So this is really at the heart of how a lot of these programs are rolled out and implemented. It's the hearts and the minds of folks who are doing this are all in the right place, and I'm always so humbled to see the work that gets put into that. However, in practice, we still have to quote unquote practice, right? Making sure that all of these pieces are being put together in a cohesive way, and then the children in the classroom are being valued by the what they bring to the classroom. So I'm going to stop here, and hopefully, I'll get some responses from you and some reflections on what you think. But I'm really excited that you all got to take a look at these pieces for this module, and I really hope that we can learn together in this particular way and think about what are the ways, right? What are the ways that we can think about all of the stages of programming, implementing, teaching, and parental involvement that we can think with this particular framework. Thank you.